There are quite a few complaints about the private equity industry. Some are valid and some are not. The question is, did the SEC need to come up with new regulations? Well, I guess it all depends on how you answer the following questions. Number one, are there enough disclosure requirements in the industry? Number two, should some investors get preferential treatment? And number three, should conflicts of interest be reduced in secondaries? To better understand the conflicts of interest in secondaries, please check out our video titled LP-led and GP-led private equity secondaries. There are lots of other questions as well, but these are my top three. Well, the SEC believed that, number one, there were not enough disclosure requirements in the industry. Number two, some investors were getting too much preferential treatment through side letters, which many times weren't disclosed. And number three, for certain secondary transactions, there should be an additional independent opinion provided by an independent opinion provider. So, on August 23rd, 2023, the SEC came out with new regulations on the private equity industry that included, number one, requiring additional disclosures through quarterly statements with specific information. Number two, creating additional rules to reduce, or some cases eliminate, preferential treatment to large investors. And number three, requiring an independent opinion on secondary transactions with the intention to reduce conflicts of interest. The SEC document is over 600 pages long, and there are a lot more details than I'm giving here because I only have so much time. But if you're interested in reading the document yourself, I have put the link to the document in the description below. Now, what will be the side effects of this regulation? Well, it's too early to tell, but I'm happy to share my thoughts. I believe that the biggest side effect of this regulation will come from the additional disclosures. So I'll come back to this topic later in the video. When it comes to preferential treatment and secondary transactions, I would assume that the industry will find a way around these rules in a similar way to how the industry figured out how to get loans through the private debt channel after Dodd-Frank restricted banks from giving certain loans. For preferential treatment, I don't think it will be difficult for private equity funds to find other ways to offer preferential treatment to large influential investors. With that said, I think the SEC rules do a good job to level the playing field when it comes to certain investors receiving preferential information about the fund. Since before the time of this document, there are cases when certain investors have access to a lot more portfolio holding information than other investors. There are more specifics to this rule, but I'll leave it there for now. For secondary transactions, well, I guess it all depends on how independent the independent opinion will be. I really hope this can be enforced for the sake of the industry. But seeing how independent opinions are in other industries, I'm not sure how optimistic I am that this will actually happen. Okay, so let's get back to the new disclosure requirements. I believe that the increased disclosure requirements are well intended. After all, I wouldn't describe the private equity industry as the most honest industry on the planet. And I'm not sure when reporting that ethics outweigh the financial benefit, but maybe it does sometimes. With that said, I believe this regulation will have a large unintended side effect. Let me explain. The increased disclosure requirements will be expensive for smaller funds. These funds usually have low margins, if any profit at all, and will be challenged by the increased expenses with the new disclosures. Now, we have seen this with the ESG requirements in Europe. There are small funds that pass all of the requirements to become an Article 9 fund, but because of additional costs, these funds can't afford, they have to settle to be an Article 8 fund. Now, for ESG in Europe, while there are different requirements to be classified as Article 8 and Article 9, if a fund doesn't meet the requirements of an Article 9 fund, it can still exist. The fund just can't say it's an Article 9 fund. I am concerned that the new 2023 SEC regulations will have a more dramatic impact because these are requirements for the fund to exist. So in the event this becomes costly and the fund can't afford it, well, they don't have another option. So if this rule is sustained in the future, I believe we will see a lot more consolidation in the industry, and I believe that a lot fewer small firms will exist. This could have the opposite of the intended effect of helping investors. If there are fewer private equity firms, and these firms are large, the bargaining power of the private equity firms will actually increase, which would ultimately hurt investors.